The most frequently asked question I get, I have to say, is how did I get here? I mean, like, what led me to become a chef and cookbook author and television host that specializes in the traditional foods of Mexico, the real deal Mexican foods? Well, here in a nutshell is how that happened. Okay, so I grew up in a restaurant family. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, my parents all had restaurants. My parents had a barbecue restaurant for 37 years in Oklahoma City called the Hickory House. And I grew up with this incredible pride for the kind of food that we made and how it was a real reflection of our Oklahoma style of barbecue. And my father was disabled when I was in high school, and my mother and I took over the restaurant when I was 16, and I took over the catering business, and that just fused for me that pride with making this regional food. But at the same time, I had gotten really interested in other cultures, and I had started taking Spanish classes and then French classes and reading about the cultures. And at 14, I convinced my family to take the first ever airplane vacation. We'd always driven everywhere to Mexico because I wanted to experience that culture firsthand. Now, I thought after my 1 year of junior high Spanish that I could be our translator and the first words out of somebody's mouth in Mexico, and I realized I just didn't understand the thing. Both humiliated me and goaded me on to study a whole lot more Spanish. But when we got to our hotel in Mexico City, I tell you that I can only describe my feeling as a feeling of having come home. For the first time in my life, I got to a place, and this was a foreign country where I didn't understand what anybody was speaking. And I thought to myself, this is my home. I want this to be part of who I am. So I continued to study Spanish all the way through high school, majored in Spanish language, literature, Latin American studies. In college, got super into anthropology, kept taking trips to Mexico with student groups, ended up doing some studies there while I was in college. And I just was like, everything about me was that I wanted to make Mexico, its culture, part of what I did in life. Now, I'd been working in restaurants all the way up. I made my way through college, obviously running my family's restaurant because I lived at home. Then I went away to graduate school to study anthropology and linguistics and sort of broaden my base beyond Mexico, but started cooking and getting jobs teaching cooking classes. And then I went all the way through my graduate program, started writing a PhD dissertation, and then my whole world changed. And I won't go into all the details of it, but literally everything in my life changed at one time. And the only thing that I was holding on to at that point was just my cooking. And I just decided I'm going to take a year off from graduate school writing my dissertation. I'm just going to explore what it means to make my living entirely by doing culinary things. Started a small catering business and fell in love with that too. And the next thing I knew, people started asking me to teach Mexican cooking classes because I'd been specializing in French food and in doing barbecue classes and in doing pastry making classes. And I wasn't doing any Mexican stuff, so I started cooking Mexican food. And one thing led to another, and a not too far away public television station actually asked me if I would do a studio show. This is back in the late 70s, on the real foods of Mexico. Now, that's an even longer story, why that came about and everything, but I did 26 shows for them, but they were all studio shows, and they were very unsatisfying to me because I wanted to get people into Mexico, and we didn't have a budget for any of that, so I just had to tell about what this food was and what its heritage was, but it really cemented my relationship with Mexico, partly because they gave me a research budget. And so twice I got to go to Mexico for 6 weeks at a time and do nothing but culinary research. And it was what I discovered cooking with marketplace cooks and family cooks for people that I knew, cooking with folks that were sort of salt of the earth cooks like you would find in the street stalls and such. And I just fell in love with what they were doing and the integrity that they brought. Remember, I had been teaching French food a lot, which was, it's all precise and about technique and all that. And I go to Mexico and I find these people cooking in markets and in street stalls that are doing all those same things. They just don't know what to call it in French. And so I said, you know, there is so much integrity here. I have to do more and more and more of this. So my wife and I, there's more parts to the story, but my wife and I finally decided we're going to move to Mexico for 1 year. We saved up all this money and we're going to write a book on regional Mexican cooking. Well, thank God, just as we were packing our bags to go to Mexico, a fellow from LA called me and he had seen the PBS shows. And he said, I want you to be a consultant for my chain of Mexican American restaurants. Well, Mexican American food is exactly what I was trying to put away. But he offered me a really good salary to come and create dishes for them, help to systematize. He was growing his small chain and he wanted to systematize it and he wanted to bring something with more integrity back into their restaurants. And so I said yes, because he said, you can work for a couple months and then be off for 3 or 4 months. And I thought, this is perfect, because what we thought was going to be a 1-year project actually turned into a 5-year project. And so we were living mostly in Mexico and coming back to do consulting work in Los Angeles. My wife figured out a place for her in his whole organization as well. So we worked our tails off when we would come back to LA, and then we would go back to Mexico. And we, during that 5 years, went to every single state in Mexico, and we cooked with those local cooks. We cooked in the marketplaces with the street stall guys. We would go to the family-owned restaurants, not the fancy ones or anything like that. We weren't interested in who made the best X in a place. We just wanted to find out what was the groundswell of local culture. What did it teach us about those people in that town? We finished our 5 years, decided to move to Chicago. I'd been going to graduate school, as had my wife, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but she was raised here. We knew we wanted to settle in a big city someplace, and she had never lived downtown Chicago. She had been raised in the suburbs, so we decided to live in downtown Chicago and finished our manuscript for our book, turned that in and looked at each other and said, what's next? And I said, you know, all this food that's in this first book, that was the book Authentic Mexican, said all this food that's in this book, people are, it's a little foreign to people, and all the ingredients aren't readily available like they are right now. And so I thought, you know what we need to do is we need to open a little restaurant, and we can make this food and we can give them a benchmark that they can go toward. And so people can make it at home, but they could come here and taste it really well made, because obviously I'd been cooking this food for 5 years and learning it from the real deal source. So we opened Frontera Grill in 1987. And oddly enough, because you could never plan this stuff, it opened on the exact same day our book, Authentic Mexican, came out. Okay, now here's a story for you. The first people that walked in the door, they sat down, it was a 4-top, and they sat down and they opened our menu with all of these different regional dishes on there. They closed their menu. They got up, the man looked at me and said, this is not Mexican food. You guys will be out of business in 6 months. We had this little restaurant with 60 seats, and we were making the real deal food. We didn't even have a bar or anything, but it just took off. And within 6 weeks, someone had flown here from New York, from the New York Times, and written a full-page article on what we were trying to do, because at that point it was kind of Tex-Mex food, and then mom and pop places that were making very simple food from the homeland, if you will. And what I was trying to do was sort of hit this kind of let's call it upscale casual, and sort of bring some panache to the way you put those traditional dishes on the plate. Now, I know a lot of you will probably say, oh, it's just about the flavor, it's not about the presentation, but no, that's not true. Come on. We all eat with our eyes before we eat with our mouths. And so I wanted to make beautiful food. And remember, I was also trained in all of this European stuff as well, and I knew how to make things look really beautiful. So we did that, And Frontera Grill just took off a couple years later. We opened next door, Topolobampo, because I had fallen in love with beautiful, fine dining Mexico City style food at places like Fond del Recuerdo, Fond del Refugio and San Angel Inn. Those kinds of places that presented things in just glorious style. So I wanted to do a fine dining Mexican restaurant, even though most people at that point thought that that was an oxymoron. And so we opened that. We expanded Frontera when that was possible. We opened Choco, doing the simple focus on tortas and caldos, the meal in a bowl soups and churros and fresh ground hot chocolate Mexican style. And then there is Bar Sotano, our newest addition, which is in the basement under Frontera Grill, which really focus not only on all kinds of agave spirits, but also on very contemporary Mexican bar food, sort of like what you'd get in Mexico City. And then, of course, along the way, I was doing all kinds of other things. I was writing more books. We started doing Mexico one plate at a time with a budget that I could do half of the filming of every show in Mexico. And so I was keeping my fingers in lots of different pots and finding it incredibly satisfying because I never took the focus off of Mexico, what the incredible cooks are doing there that I had discovered during my first culinary investigation tours. And to this day, that's what it's really all about. And I'm so thrilled to say that at this point, not only have we kept that focus, but we have also spun off a whole lot of cooks from our restaurant, a lot of people that grew up in Mexico or from Mexican American heritage, and we have given them a tremendous amount of courage to say, look, people love your food. Go out there and make your versions of it and make it beautiful. And use good ingredients and put it on a plate in a way that shows that you love the beauty of what you've created here. And that, in a nutshell, is my story.